Welcome to Nemo Paint. In this first video, I will tell you about catastrophic plane crashes where the direct cause came from the human side. First is the Lockheed L-1011 aircraft disaster. On August 19, 1980, Flight 163 of Saudi Arabian Airlines took off from Riyadh carrying a total of 301 people. At that time, the Lockheed L-1011 was considered to be one of the extremely modern and safe aircraft models. Initially, everything took place very normally, just like any other flight. But only a few minutes after takeoff, the pilots discovered smoke rising violently from the rear cargo compartment. Immediately, a decision for an emergency landing was made. At this point, the pilot performed a perfect landing back at the Riyadh airport. The aircraft then touched down very smoothly, and there was absolutely no collision or explosion at all. The crowd at the airport at that time, as well as the passengers on the plane, breathed a sigh of relief because they thought that everything was safe. But in reality, the horrific tragedy was only now truly beginning. Instead of ordering an immediate evacuation after the aircraft landed and stopped completely on the runway, the flight crew let the aircraft continue taxiing for another 2.5 minutes before finally coming to a complete stop. The pilots were even so complacent that they still let the engines run after the plane had stopped without shutting down the engines for inspection. This very action caused the thick toxic smoke from the fire in the cargo hold to be sucked back into the passenger cabin through the ventilation system. At this time on the outside, the rescue teams had to stand immobile, and it took them as long as 23 minutes to be able to open the aircraft door due to pressure and strict procedures. And when the door was finally opened, a terrible sight appeared before their eyes. All 301 people inside had died due to smoke inhalation. They were reported to be still sitting intact in their seats, with their heads leaning against the backrests, and their eyes closed as if they were falling into a deep sleep. The toxic smoke from the burning luggage compartment caused the passengers to lose consciousness gently, without them even knowing it. This is one of the most haunting aviation disasters in history, where the cause came from the complacency of the individuals operating the aircraft. Next is the accident of Air Peru Flight 603. The disaster occurred on the night of October 2, 1996. On that day, the Boeing 757 aircraft was scheduled to take off from the international airport in Lima, Peru, to head toward the Arturo Merino Benitez International Airport in Santiago, Chile. By the time the aircraft reached the Pacific Ocean, it was around the middle of the night. Since this was a flight taking place at night over the water, there were absolutely no lights or any visual reference points below at that time to communicate the true altitude to the pilots or to assist with the descent. At this point, a strange incident also began to occur inside the cockpit. While the aircraft was flying through the pitch-black night, the automated warning system continuously sounded the too-low alarm to warn the pilots of a potential collision. However, when the pilots looked at the primary altimeter, the device still calmly reported that they were at an extremely safe altitude. By this time, they were approaching the destination airport. The pilots were forced to lower the altitude of the aircraft so that they could land. In that blinding darkness, the pilots were completely disoriented. They fell into a terrible psychological state as they had to choose between the alarms on one side and the numbers displayed on the navigation equipment on the other. Ultimately, because they trusted the instruments reporting a safe altitude, the flight crew decided to lower the altitude of the aircraft even further. This was a fatal mistake. The aircraft slowly descended and continued to lower until the pilots finally realized the disaster. A portion of the aircraft wing struck the surface of the Pacific Ocean directly. The horrific impact at a high speed tore off a part of the left wing of the aircraft. The pilots then tried their best to regain altitude and managed to keep the 757 in the air for 19 seconds. But due to the damage to the left wing, the aircraft flipped over and crashed into the water almost upside down. The consequence of this accident resulted in the deaths of all 70 people on board the aircraft. So why did this aircraft provide such misleading warnings? After experts salvaged the wreckage of the ill-fated aircraft, they found the cause of the accident. It turned out that a maintenance worker had previously used adhesive tape to seal the static ports for the purpose of washing the aircraft. But after the cleaning was finished, he completely forgot to remove them before the aircraft began its journey. Static ports are very important for the operation of most flight instruments because they provide basic aerodynamic data, such as airspeed, altitude, and vertical speed, which allows the system to provide accurate warnings. The Japan Airlines Flight 123 aviation disaster. The story begins on August 12, 1985. This was the traditional Obon holiday in Japan, which is an occasion for families to reunite. You can imagine this festival as being similar to New Year's Day. At that time, people who work far away return to their families. This is the Boeing 747 on that fateful flight of the day. This massive aircraft carried 524 passengers and crew members taking off from Tokyo to head to Osaka. At this moment, the plane was packed with people and the atmosphere was very happy because everyone was excited about returning home soon. There were also many famous people on this flight, such as the singer and actor Kyu Sakamoto or the composer Diana Yukawa. Only 12 minutes after takeoff, an earth-shattering explosion rang out from the tail of the aircraft. An aft pressure bulkhead exploded. The incredible pressure caused the entire vertical stabilizer and the hydraulic systems controlling the aircraft to be completely destroyed. At this point, the aircraft fell into a state of absolute loss of control, and it began to oscillate wildly. The co-pilot at that time was Captain Masami Takahama, who immediately sent out a warning signal. At the same time, he also instructed the pilot to try to control the aircraft to fly in the sky so that they could maintain flight for as long as possible. However, very soon after that, the aircraft experienced a loss of oxygen, which caused all the passengers and crew to fall into a state of unconsciousness. The Tokyo Control Center tried to contact the aircraft again but received no response. And then the struggle for survival lasted for 32 minutes. Finally, the aircraft crashed into the slope of Mount Takamagahara. This is the worst single aircraft disaster in history, with 520 people killed. But the reality is that after that horrific collision, only 4 women miraculously survived because they were sitting in the tail section of the aircraft. After the disaster occurred, investigators quickly tracked down the flight data recorder to find out what caused this aircraft to crash. It is unbelievable that the accident occurring that day actually originated from a cause 7 years prior. This aircraft had once suffered a tail strike during landing, and the Boeing company sent engineers to repair it. But instead of using a single intact steel plate to join the bulkhead, they cut it in half and joined it with 2 rows of rivets. Specifically, this faulty joint could not withstand the pressure after thousands of flights, and it finally exploded at an altitude of thousands of meters. A technical error that was overlooked for 7 years led to this tragedy. Generally speaking, the thing that makes me feel the most heartbroken is not the death, but what was found in the wreckage. Actually, regarding this accident, besides the fact that the number of victims who lost their lives was so high, the thing that makes me feel the most heartbroken is what was found among the wreckage. Please take care of Mother. Dad is sorry for not being able to come home for dinner with the family. Those scribbled lines became a symbol of love that transcends even death. Today, at the mountain where the plane crashed, a memorial has been erected to remind us of the value of every single moment we are alive in this world.
The Gull Flight 1907 aircraft disaster. The incident began on the afternoon of September 29, 2006, when a Boeing 737 operating as Gull Flight 1907 was carrying 154 people on a journey from Manaus to Rio de Janeiro. From the opposite direction, a Legacy 600, which was a state-of-the-art private jet that had just come off the assembly line, was performing a delivery flight to its new owner in the United States, with 2 experienced pilots sitting in the cockpit. While at an altitude of 37,000 feet, roughly between Brasilia and Manaus, near the town of Matupa and 750 kilometers from Manaus, a violent collision occurred. For reasons that were not yet understood, the Boeing 737 and the Legacy 600 collided head-on. With that extremely powerful mid-air collision, half of the left wing of the Boeing 737 was completely broken off, causing it to plunge and spin out of control and explode in mid-air. The Boeing 737 eventually crashed into a dense tropical rainforest 200 kilometers away from the municipality of Peixoto de Azevedo. All 154 passengers and crew members were killed. But after the collision, the Legacy 600 suffered only minor damage to its wingtip and managed to maintain its altitude, after which it landed safely at the Cachimbo airport. Immediately after landing, the National Civil Aviation Agency quickly conducted arrests and interrogations. Preliminary investigation results showed that for some unknown reason, the collision avoidance system on the Legacy 600 aircraft was not functioning at the time the accident occurred. Because this system failed, it directly disabled the ability to detect and be detected by other aircraft.
That was the reason why both the Boeing 737 and the Legacy 600 could not detect each other on their radar screens, leading to such a tragedy. Data from the cockpit voice recorder of the Legacy 600 showed that the flight crew did not know that the collision avoidance system was not working until after the accident had occurred. 2 years later, on December 10, 2008, the real reason why the collision avoidance system on the Legacy 600 aircraft failed was brought to light. First, it was an air traffic control error. The air traffic controllers in Brasilia had instructed the 2 aircraft to fly in opposite directions at the same altitude on the same airway without any safe separation. The second reason was that the transponder of the Legacy 600 was accidentally turned off. This very thing caused the collision avoidance system to be disabled and rendered it unable to warn the pilots. Clearly, this accident exposed serious weaknesses in the aviation infrastructure and the air traffic management system of Brazil at that time.
Finally, there is the accident of British Airways Flight 5390. While the aforementioned accidents all had a tragic outcome, the passengers in this accident were much luckier, and this is considered to be one of the rare miracles in aviation history. On June 10, 1990, at that time, the aircraft for Flight 5390 was scheduled to depart from the city of Birmingham in England to go to Spain. Everything initially proceeded very smoothly until the aircraft reached an altitude of over 5,000 meters. Now please look at this simulation photo of the cockpit. This is the position of Captain Tim Lancaster. Right when the aircraft was flying steadily, the windshield in front of the captain suddenly blew out completely. When this shield shattered, the extreme pressure difference between the inside and the outside created a horrific suction force. This suction immediately pulled half of the body of Captain Tim out of the window. Fortunately, his legs became caught in the control panel, which prevented him from being blown away. Right at that moment, a flight attendant named Nigel Ogden managed to rush forward to hold tightly onto the legs of Captain Tim. Nigel had to strain himself to hold the legs of his colleague for 20 long minutes while the wind whistled at a speed of up to 600 kilometers per hour, and the temperature dropped to below -17 degrees Celsius. Actually, at that time, all of the flight crew thought that Captain Tim was probably already dead. That was because through the small window frame, they saw his eyes were still wide open, but they were not blinking at all. So why could a windshield that is normally very strong blow out so easily like that? After investigating the incident, the experts discovered a very foolish truth. It was because a maintenance worker had used the wrong type of screws to install the glass. Specifically, these screws were only 0.6 millimeters smaller than the standard. Just because of a 0.6 millimeter error, the lives of 100 people were almost taken away. It was also extremely lucky that the co-pilot of the flight performed a successful emergency landing at the Southampton airport. And Captain Tim Lancaster not only survived but was also able to return to work after only 5 months of recovery.